I thought to myself, I said, I had such a good experience with the Honda that let me go get a Toyota Tacoma. Toyota Tacoma, great trucks. They run forever. I'm sure you've seen the odometer, 400,000, whatever. So I'm like, let me get something that's in the twos. So I got a truck that was like about 259,000 kilometers, great condition, 2009. I know I should have thought about that as well. I realized after, I'm like, oh, this is about a 14 or 15-year-old car. But again, I had an 06 Civic. It was still running at the time when I bought this purchase. So I figured if it's maintained well and it's a Toyota, the engine, the transmission, the big parts will be fine. And they were. I drove it for 15,000 kilometers. It was totally fine. I learned how to drive manual on it. So I was being a little, picky in terms of getting something manual. And so because it was a little specialized, I ended up paying 15,000. I spent the full budget on the truck. And then I spent a little bit more to get it safetied. And it was on the road. Served us well, moved a lot of furniture in it, got a lot of use, got a lot of value on it. Some clients needed to move some stuff. That came out super handy. And then I was like, wow, this is great. In the end, my Civic died. And then I needed something that was going to be a little bit more economical as a daily, because the truck, as much as I did get a 4-cylinder and it was good and it was fuel efficient, to drive to Oakville or Hamilton and stuff, it just didn't make sense, right? The newer trucks are a lot more fuel efficient. I listed the truck. I didn't get any bites at 15 grand. This is like about 7 months later. And I knew I paid a little bit of a premium at the time because the truck was in great condition, new paint job, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, the bones of it were older. And then I was like, the ABS light came on, the traction light came on, then the parking brake light came on. And that's when I knew this was going to cost me a lot more than $15,000.
I'm here with
Terrence Marshall.
How old are you and what do you do for a living?
I'm 29 years old and I'm a chartered accountant and also a real estate agent full time and team leader at Synergy Real Estate.
So what were you taught about money growing up and who taught you?
Honestly, my relationship with money started with a supplementary credit card. Oddly enough, my father trusted me with the supplementary credit card when I was 16, and I had a job at the time. I was working as a lifeguard, and that was my first attempt at learning how to manage expenses.
What's a supplementary credit card for anyone who doesn't know?
Absolutely. A supplementary credit card is basically a credit card that can be given to anyone. Usually the minimum age is 16. I think in some cases it can also be 14 years old, but it basically means that you get a secondary card that uses the same credit limit, but the primary card holder is held responsible for all charges made on the supplementary credit card. So if you go on a little spending spree, then your dad's going to be responsible for it, in other words, but you can also set a spending limit on that as well. So the supplementary credit card was really my first encounter with, earning an income, but actually managing expenses. That supplementary credit card was kind of given to me more so as an emergency use. It wasn't really like, okay, son, we're going to give you this card
to build credit, right?
And I trust you, so you're going to go build credit because you don't have a credit score at 16, right? But luckily I was just, naturally responsible, and I obviously wasn't just going to blow it away. And maybe my parents knew that from, the way I behaved. But at the end of the day, really the way I learned about money was more so through observation. My dad was good at saving his money. My mom was also pretty frugal. They were not, savvy investors or business people. They were not really self-employed, typical immigrant working a 9-to-5 job, if you will. And so really, I continued to observe, and then, my dad started buying a second property, and then we moved from our first apartment that we had in Canada all the way to a 4-bedroom home. Obviously, it wasn't in an area that was very well developed at the time, but later on did become developed, and then bought another property on that same street. And then I again observed that the equity or the price or the value of the property had increased. So that really put a light bulb in my head, because I realized that, we were pretty much in the middle class at that point. The rental income from that property was really allowing us to also thrive in the middle class. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question, I wasn't really, taught theoretically like, hey, this is how much money you should put aside. This is how much you should invest, or this is what a stock is. I really just kind of observed minutely like what my dad was doing. And I think traditionally he's just really good at managing money, and saving money and investing money are two totally different things. Yeah. I think immigrants,
you need to save to invest.
You need to save to invest, absolutely. But some people will save and never really take that big step to investing, which is what really will increase your net worth.
When did you learn, like, did you teach yourself the whole credit card game in the terms of you pay off the balance and you don't want to be a revolver and like interest rates and all that? Like, is that all like you did your own research, or like how did you learn not to like, or like you were just naturally responsible?
I didn't do my own research, but I think one thing I'll say is my dad just said you better pay that balance off in full.
Okay, you had that
Right?
talk.
That I didn't even have a talk. My dad just said pay the balance in full at the end of the month. That was the talk, right?
Yeah.
Like how
Yeah.
most talks are, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Did you have the talk? I'm like, no, my parents did not have the talk with me, right? So, and I'm sure most people can relate to that, right?
Yeah.
So, in essence, when it came to managing the credit card, I just made sure, okay, no matter what, I'm going to pay off this credit card balance in full, because I remember seeing the number, the interest rate on that bill, and it said 23%.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, here's one thing that was insane to me. From 16 to maybe 19 or 20,
Yeah.
I had this theory in my head. I'm like, credit card companies, I was like, how do they make money? Because I thought everybody was just paying their bill in full. Because I just thought that's the right thing to do, right?
Okay.
Then I realized, wow, people are actually carrying balances at 23%, which destroys you. I mean, if you're constantly accruing interest at that rate, you'll never catch up, right? I mean, saving is one. Here's the crazy thing. People will talk about investing. To invest, you have to save, but for people to even learn how to save is a whole other ball game, right?
Yep.
So
Yeah.
just trying to stay net zero is hard for most people. And again, it all comes down to financial literacy, education. Honestly, I think there was just inherently something about observing my parents just, managing their money. And also me knowing this is how much I'm bringing in, this is how much I'm spending. I got to pay that in full no matter what. At that time, that even is enough, as Dave Ramsey would say.
Do you think that you have to own the home that you live in to build wealth?
I don't think you need to own your home to build wealth, and I'll tell you why. And I'll be unbiased about this because I am a realtor. I just sell one asset class. That's real estate. Am I biased to real estate? Of course. I've built all my net worth off of real estate, but there are many assets that you can build wealth with, many investment vehicles. There's a life insurance policy. There's stocks. There's bonds. There's real estate. There's small businesses that you can invest in. There's investment properties, right? Real estate. So, no, you don't have to. But I do think that building wealth requires a diversified strategy. And I never always took that approach. I was actually very heavily weighted towards real estate, and that's why I will still be biased. Yeah. Do I think in this climate things have changed? Of course. Do I think that there was maybe a little bit of a run up the last few years and there won't be in the future? Of course. But that's just like any investment, right? The market can change at any point in time, supply and demand, et cetera, et cetera. So at this point in time, I'm looking at diversifying the wealth I've acquired in my real estate assets by actually disposing some of those assets and then redeploying that capital into different asset classes. So I would say there are a lot of people out there that have also done the opposite than I have, been heavily weighted in another asset class and built wealth that way, right? I think the most important thing is that you're saving your money in order to invest it and then investing with a diversified strategy. That way you balance out your risk and still obtain a good reward at the end of the day. Personally, for me, the reason why I own my own home is I have control. Right? And I think there's a certain price to be paid for control. Meaning, if my landlord were to come to me today and say, Terrence, you got to be out in 60 days, and I got to pick up my entire life, move, pack, have all that stress in the middle of running my own business, that's going to significantly interrupt my life and my business. And so for me to pay that premium in, let's just say, my principal residence versus like a rent versus own example in today's climate, mind you, I purchased my property like 2 years ago. I'm living a duplex, so I offset some of my mortgage that way. That's a strategy, right? So I'm pretty much house hacking right now. Although the extreme version of house hacking is you live in the lower cost unit and rent out the upstairs. I'm doing the opposite, but at least it covers one of my 2 mortgage payments every month. So that's one way where I still think for what I pay every month, it's the equivalent of a 2-bed, 2-bath condo, let's say, but I live in a 4-bedroom house. So I feel like that's a good trade-off for me to have control over my property. And I need to be living in the location where I do my work, right? Be close to work, because, that's all relates to convenience, and I'm willing to pay that premium. But if I was to have to restart in today's climate where interest rates are 5% and rents are much cheaper than a mortgage payment, of course, renting my own principal residence, if it costed that significant premium, I would highly reconsider owning versus renting. That's kind of my take on, every situation is different, right? Like if I'm a single person and I'm living in a condo, like I would evaluate that scenario compared to like, let's say a residential property, detached home in the suburbs, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a case by case basis. And again, what are you willing to pay in order to have that control, right?
What do you think in this climate, if you were to start all over, is a reasonable amount of your income to put towards housing costs if you're owning your home?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Percentage wise.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, how about we start with what the bank thinks that
Yeah.
you're, and maybe I'll have a mortgage agent on here. So
Yeah.
I'm not a mortgage agent. This is not financing advice,
Yeah.
but based on my knowledge, the bank will qualify you on 40% of your gross income. So your gross debt servicing has to be no more than 40% of your gross income that goes towards your mortgage payment, property taxes, and heat.
Yeah.
Okay.
That doesn't factor in maintenance, repairs, all that stuff.
That doesn't factor in any of that. So
Utilities.
Well, it factors in heat, but either way, the other utilities for sure. So let's assume that the bank thinks that they're safe underwriting that policy with a stress test, of course, and putting that in you shouldn't be spending more than 40% of your gross income per month. I think that that's significantly high because, add factor in taxes. We haven't factored in taxes yet. And when you factor in taxes, I want to say that could go close to your 60, 65, probably even more maybe. And then this is why Canadian household debt is at record levels. We have the highest household debt in the world. And that's why Canadians then have to resort to revolving credit for all their other monthly expenses, because no matter what, the mortgage has to get paid. You can't put your mortgage payment on your credit card. I mean, you could, there are probably people doing a cash advance right now because things are just really tough right now, right? I think that answers the question as to what the bank thinks. I personally think that number should be more closer to 30%.
Me too.
30% of your take home. Because then you have a sufficient amount to actually put towards saving and investing, which, imagine if 65% of your income is going towards your household, then what about the rest of your other expenses, gas, food, insurance? And then you've got nothing left for savings, nothing left for investing.
And what if interest rates go up?
What if interest rates go up in the future? And then you look at, most people are pretty mobile, like our job force and our economy. Long gone are the days where you're 30 years at the same employer, you have a secure pension plan. Like in the past, at least when you got a good job with a good company, you're like, retirement was planned for you. They were matching your contributions. They were setting up your pension plan. So even if you were a regular T4 employee, you had a plan. But now you might be a T4 employee for a bit. You're going to jump jobs to try to get a salary jump. And then you're over leveraged on your housing commitment. You don't have any savings plan. You don't have any investment plan. Mind you, I know we're still young, but at some point you're going to have to think about retirement, right?
Mm-hmm.
So unfortunately, I don't think committing yourself up to 65% leaves you with any room to be able to plan.
How old were you when you learned what a credit score is?
Yeah, so I learned about credit probably around 18. I remember going on that Equifax website and actually checking like the plots on the graph and seeing my score change from month to month. I was, always paying the balance off in full, but some months, I was spending a decent amount of money compared to what the credit limit was. And then that's when I learned about credit utility or utilization rather.
Yeah.
So I started to realize, okay, well, if I spend $4,000 of my $5,000 credit limit and it gets recorded as my statement balance, then the bank sees that my statement was $4,000, my credit limit was $5,000. This guy's using 80% of the credit allotted to him, even though he pays it off the next month. It looks like I'm relying on credit, and then I realized that affects my score. So I started asking for credit limit increases. Some of those things would also come naturally if you're spending a lot and paying it off in full. Those would come naturally, and then that would help your utilization. But that's when I first encountered credit, and then also started to kind of learn how the score was being calculated based on a few factors, like one of them being utilization.
Do you think having a good credit score is important, and why?
I think it's incredibly important. I don't know if there's anything more financially important than having a good credit score. I remember my dad saying to me, if you don't have a credit score, nobody's going to want to talk to you.
I heard a
Nobody's
similar
gonna wanna
answer.
talk to you.
I heard a similar answer in the previous person. The
Like,
previous person before you had a similar story.
yeah, I think it was like nobody's gonna want to talk to you, or no girl's gonna want to talk to you, or something hilarious like that. And that stuck with me. Not for the part that
Yeah.
the girl would talk to me, but
Yeah.
no one would talk to me.
Yeah.
The bank wouldn't want to talk to
And
me.
you took that serious.
Nobody would
Yeah.
want to do business with me, essentially. And I think it's so important because it's essentially tells such a huge story.
Mhm.
Like that one number tells
Your behavior,
everything about
your human
you.
behavior, right?
It basically describes your behavior when it comes to finances.
Mm-hmm.
The lower the number, the worse you are with your finances. The higher the cost of borrowing, the higher the cost of doing business with anybody lending you money. So the more responsible you are, the better rates you get because your risk is lower to the lender. The lower your score, the higher your risk, the higher the cost of borrowing. It's very simple. So I think it's super crucial to maintain a good credit score because when it comes to saving and then later investing, leverage, right? Leverage is what is so crucial to being able to actually increase your net worth, right? Leverage of human capital is one thing, but leverage of your money, right? Like, so when you buy real estate, you put 20% down, you leverage the bank and you can get an 80% loan. That 80% loan is contingent on your credit score being good, right? So good to excellent, as the mortgage agent would tell you, right? So, or as the bank would want to see. So it's very important.
What would you say is the best piece of information about personal finance that you learned that has impacted you the most?
It's really
You
interesting.
have to pick one thing.
I had to pick one thing
Yeah.
that had the biggest impact on me
in your
my finances.
Yeah.
I would say, I've heard everybody say this answer, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I'm gonna get a lot of flack for this. I've never read the book. I've never read the book, but I get the gist of it. I've heard it so many times. The cash
You've
flow
seen the summary.
quadrant,
Yeah.
the liability.
Yeah.
Your principal resident is an asset, right? All that stuff.
Yeah.
But for me, I would say personally, the biggest aha moment was when the condo I purchased, it was a pre-con and there was a time for pre-con.
Yeah.
It's
What
not now.
year is this?
This was in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, 2018, I think, is when I booked it.
Yeah.
No, I lied. 2015.
Okay.
Sorry.
Good.
2015 is when I booked it, and it came up in 2018. And so there was significant equity that was built in over that time.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest part was when I took my income and I went to the bank and I said, I'd like a line of credit against this equity. Or I didn't take a HELOC. I did a refinance.
Mm-hmm.
So I pulled all that capital out and I leveraged it into other investment assets. And so I think that was the biggest aha moment for me when I realized.
How did you know to do that?
I think my dad had done it in order to purchase the third property, refinance the second property, and use some of that to go towards the down payment. So
this is all from observation of your dad. He didn't tell you, hey, go, you should refinance.
No. He would talk to me. I think I asked a question, or I was wondering how did we get that property, and I think he told me, and I was also just like doing a lot of research on real estate and talking to people about it and asking them like, how did you get the second property, right? It was really a lot of observation and a little research, because if I had done a whole ton of research, I would have probably been doing the Burr method and that would have been more lucrative. But I didn't get that far, and so I kept it simple. Only thing I was observing was my dad buying one pre-con. And so then I just went and bought a pre-con, right? Eventually I got more educated on the fact, but I think the fact that the bank was willing to loan me money based on my income and the asset, and then I could take this money and reinvest it rather than having to wait to save all this money and then invest it, taught me the power of leverage and compounding. That's significantly how even my net worth to today, I would literally say that a lot of it was built based on that.
Do you have a budget?
I don't have a budget. Okay. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have a budget, but I would highly recommend anybody that has a spending problem have a budget. I'll rephrase. I think everybody should have a budget.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody should have a budget. But what I'm good at is I know what I'm spending.
Technically, you do have a budget then, mentally, right?
Mentally, I always have a budget. Or I'm always cognizant of what am I spending my money on? Is this a good value for my money? That's why I shop at Costco, because I always know I'm getting good value at Costco.
So you know where every dollar goes.
I know where every dollar goes. And I have things set up on pre-authorized debits. And when I'm committing to things like my Apple News subscription, Like I know that's going to cost me $15 a month, and that's a subscription I'm willing to pay. And I know that that's what it costs me annually. Kind of like if I were to buy coffee every single day, like I would know this is what my total damage is at the end of the year. That's something I don't invest in, like a coffee every single day. Yeah, every now and then a coffee's fine. I'm aware my mortgage payment costs me this much. My household costs are this much. Food roughly costs me this much. And I stay within those parameters. Like it's not to the degree where I'm so financially illiterate that I need to, get an envelope for my food, my thing, put cash in there, and then know when the envelope is done, like, hey, I can't spend any more money. But some people need to do that.
Yeah,
some people need to do that. Like if you're not good at it, good at managing it mentally, then physically put it out into separate envelopes and say, this is my entertainment budget. This is my food budget. And then when the envelope's done that month, you got to wait till next month. And then when you physically see that there's less money in the envelope,
you feel the pain.
And some people are visual learners. Some people can figure that stuff out mentally. And then some people are just like wired to like be frugal and watch their dollar. And some people aren't. And some people have been educated and some people haven't been. So, and that could be on different topics, right? But we're just talking about finances here. So being financially literate.
Tell us the biggest money mistake you've ever made.
Honestly, the biggest money mistake I've ever made. Funny enough that this recording got delayed a week because I made that mistake within the last week.
No way.
Within the last week. I cannot tell you that there's been something where I've taken a loss on in such... Actually, wait a second. I have a bigger one, but it was also when I was a lot younger and immature and not as like savvy, right? That was just day trading the stock market. Like day trading the stock market at a young age and just not understanding what fundamentals are, not understanding what value investing is. And you're pretty much gambling at that point. So I was like self-directed investing. I'm like, what is this, right? I opened an account, put some money in it, tried to day trade. That didn't work out. I learned very quickly I'm not a day trader. And one thing I realized is, okay, you know what? This asset class is not for me. So I'm going to just stay back. I'm going to just work and earn as much money as I can working. And that's what I did until I had enough to save for a down payment on a property. And then once that was starting to go well and I was learning and educating myself and understanding this, I was like, you know what? I'm good at this. I'm going to focus on this and I'm just going to continue down that path. And that's what I continue to do. So after I made that mistake, I never made it again. And even, I want to say it was 5 digits. It was like probably about 10 grand. Yeah. It's around 10 grand. And 10 grand at that time was a lot of money. Oh, yeah. Like that was probably about 90% of my net worth at that time. So this is probably like 18, 17, 18, 18. There was no first year university. This was on RBC self-directed investing. Their platforms sucked. $10 each time. $10 each time on top of everything. Yeah, that's what I learned what a capital loss was.
Kids nowadays won't know that because they have Wealthsimple.
Wealthsimple or Questrade, right? Questrade, yeah. So believe it or not, that scarred me so much. So ever since that episode, I was somewhat scarred. I didn't go back to the stock market until literally 2 years ago. Even that, like it just scarred me so much. I was like, I never went back till 2 years ago. And I had a client who was an advisor. So, I helped them deal with their real estate investments. And then I gave them a little bit of my money to manage then in the stock market. And I just said, you keep it. I don't want to know what's going on with it. Just long-term invest it for me. And that was just part of the process of again, diversifying. So in general, that was a money mistake. And ever since that point, so coming to now, I realized, so I bought a vehicle. And I didn't buy new. I would never do that. That would be the day that I come back on here to tell you my biggest money mistake. Don't ever buy a new vehicle, like 20% off the lot. So I thought, you know what? Somebody told me, and I also realized having a truck in the real estate investment business is a good tool to have. So I said to myself, I'm going to keep myself on a budget. I'm not going to spend more than $15,000. And $15,000 today with inflation doesn't get you much. Okay? Doesn't get you much. So you barely get a Honda Civic. So who was I fooling? I bought my Honda Civic in 2016 for 7 grand. It had 100,000 kilometers. I drove it. It just died. 405,000 kilometers. I drove it 300,000 kilometers. And even when I got rid of it for $750. $6,000 to drive 300,000 kilometers plus literally just oil changes and brake. I thought to myself, I said, I had such a good experience with a Honda that let me go get a Toyota Tacoma. Toyota Tacoma, great trucks. They run forever. I'm sure you've seen the odometer, 400,000, whatever. So I'm like, let me get something that's in the twos. So I got a truck that was like about 259,000 kilometers, great condition, 2009. I know I should have thought about that as well. I realized after, I'm like, oh, this is about a 14 or 15-year-old car. But again, I had an '06 Civic. It was still running at the time when I bought this purchase. So I figured if it's maintained well and it's a Toyota, the engine, the transmission, the big parts will be fine. And they were. I drove it for 15,000 kilometers. It was totally fine. I learned how to drive manual on it. So I was being a little, picky in terms of getting something manual. And so because it was a little specialized, I ended up paying 15,000. I spent the full budget on the truck. And then I spent a little bit more to get it safetied. And it was on the road, served us well, moved a lot of furniture in it, got a lot of use, got a lot of value on it. Some clients needed to move some stuff. That came out super handy. And then I was like, wow, this is great. In the end, my Civic died. And then I needed something that was going to be a little bit more economical as a daily, because the truck, as much as I did get a 4-cylinder and it was good and it was fuel efficient, to drive to Oakville or Hamilton and stuff, it just didn't make sense, right? The newer trucks are a lot more fuel efficient. I listed the truck. I didn't get any bites at 15 grand. This is like about 7 months later. And I knew I paid a little bit of a premium at the time because the truck was in great condition, new paint job, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, the bones of it were older. And then I was like, the ABS light came on, the traction light came on, then the parking brake light came on. And that's when I knew, this was going to cost me a lot more than $15,000. But more than my money, it was my time. It was the time that it took away from me being in my business, and the time that it took away from me enjoying the important things in my life, that when I realized, okay, wow, I'm getting mature now. Like I'm starting to realize, spending and saving some money on the vehicle I'm driving, while it was still a good decision to buy used, maybe not buying that old, because now I'm going to spend additional money. I'm going to spend additional time. And now it's like my opportunity cost. The time to fix the truck is not worth my time in my business, right? Spending time in my business. So I realized that was a mistake. I sold the truck at a loss. I sold it for $12,900. So it wasn't terrible. But it was after 7 months. I should have not taken such a significant hit when everybody was like, Tacomas are going to hold their value. The Tacoma is a great truck. I would say.
What would you say is your biggest money win?
I would say my biggest money win is probably it's in real estate. It was probably the first condo I purchased. Honestly, that created the snowball effect. The equity that I built in that condo, I refinanced it out and I leveraged it. What came out of that was also, because it was my principal residence, it was a tax-free gain when I sold it. While I owned it and while I was living there, I refinanced that money, and then I deployed it into other investments. And then when I sold it, all the money I had borrowed against it and all my profits were also tax-free. So I had no tax bill at the end of the day because it was my principal residence, right? So I probably wouldn't be in the position I am in today if I didn't quickly extract that equity and deploy it, because I had no other real mechanism to build wealth with. I would credit my net worth to that condo.
What is the best investment vehicle in your opinion, and why?
What is the best investment vehicle? I'm a little biased here. I think real estate is a great asset, and it's just because I think of the leverage. There's no really other asset that you can put 20% down and leverage 80%. At the same time, you've got to do that responsibly, right? I personally think an investment property should at least be a net of expense, like net zero when it comes to your cash flow, at least, if not positive cash flow. But I think there are a lot of other investment vehicles that are great. I think what I've come across recently, I think there's nothing that there's no excuse as to why anybody should not have a life insurance policy. I think that's just a no-brainer, whether your budget can, supplement a term life policy or a whole life policy. That's something I've come across recently, and I'm in the works of, planning out for myself, because that's something, even if you become wealthy or don't become wealthy, I think as long as you have dependents, it makes sense. As long as even somebody, your family or your dependents could use the money if you pass, God forbid, tax-free money, tax-free. That's what another huge reason why I'm such a big proponent of it. And as well, insurance companies are probably one of the most solid businesses. Even during a recession, they've been around before the banks. So they invest your money. They're just blue chips. They invest, they diversify their investments, like auto insurance, home insurance, like real estate. Like they're in everything, right? So who better to just have an investment just being invested for you? I think those two, life insurance is just something that I personally just recently came across. So I'm a big proponent of it based on what I know about it so far. And real estate, I just have to credit it because it's just what I think is best long term. And I also say that with a big consideration for timing. The younger you are, the better real estate is for you, because real estate is not something that is a short term investment. Like, it's a long term investment. Like real estate, long time ago, supposed to be a very conservative 3% a year, 3 to 5% a year. That's all you made. But I think we've been spoiled by the last 5 to 7, maybe last decade, even more than that, I want to say. In Toronto specifically, I don't think asset values, should be that inflated that quickly. And so there's a whole other factors, money printing. We can go down the whole rabbit hole. But let's just say that I personally think, due to leverage in a good economy where you have time on your side, and you can with good fundamentals, real estate is a great investment, and life insurance as well.
So how much of your income do you save on a monthly basis, and how much do you think people should save?
I would say that on average, I don't have a fixed number. My expenses and stuff do fluctuate, but I would say at minimum 10%. If anything, my target is 20% per month, save a monthly income.
Of the money that you save, do you consistently invest it, or do you just save it up till the next opportunity comes up?
So I think it's really important to always have a certain amount of reserves in cash. Not everything should be invested. Like, there should be a certain portion of your portfolio that's cash, and that's important for opportunities that come up. Really smart, wealthy people, they keep a good portion in cash, because if they see a good opportunity, they can deploy quickly. And usually, if you can deploy quickly, you can get a good deal. So I keep a portion in cash, and the rest I consistently invest into different asset classes.
How much do you know about investing in the stock market, and where did you learn it from?
So I don't know a considerable amount. I'm not watching the markets every day. I'm not watching the tickers. I've learned that the stock market is something that, if you're putting money into, just get somebody else to manage it for you, because it's just probably better that they're looking at it every day. That's what they're doing for a living. So they'll know what best to do with your money. So I've kind of, obviously, for the purposes of my profession, like, as a CPA and filing taxes, I definitely know the fundamentals of how it works, right? Like, what a dividend paying stock is, what a growth stock is, what the blue chip stocks are, how you invest in a TFSA, and what's the consequences of investing in a non-reg account. Yeah, I'm well versed, because I'm obviously also advising clients in terms of like what they should invest into in order to maintain a diversified investment strategy. So to that degree, I'm aware, but in terms of the details, like on a day-to-day basis, I'm not that well versed.
Do you have a TFSA and RRSP, and when did you open them?
I don't have an RRSP. I do have a TFSA. I think a TFSA is just, you put money in, anything that grows from it is totally tax free. That compounds over time. So the sooner you put the money in, the more time you have for that money to accumulate, grow tax free. RRSP, on the other hand, I don't have it. Couple reasons. At the time, I thought, instead of contributing to my RRSP, that I could make a greater return outside of it in real estate. And I did. And so that was a good bet that I made. Not a good bet, but a decision that was calculated. I realized, okay, this is what the tax benefit is. This is what it might grow in an RSP. And I think, yeah, that was included as well. At the time when I was making these investments, I wasn't making a crazy income. Like, it's not like my tax bracket was 50%. And even now, all of my income, like as a realtor being incorporated, I don't create RRSP room. Right? So So you need to be an employee. You need to earn employment income. 18% of your employment income is what your RSP room increases by year over year. So as an employee and as an unsavvy investor, the typical average person definitely have an RSP. It's an easy, plain vanilla way to save money on your taxes. And also, there's another huge thing is that if you want to increase your down payment, use the tax refund from the RSP deduction, because when you put that 35 in, you create a refund at tax time, right? So if you could go all the way up to, let's call it March 1st, the first 2 months of the year. Let's say February 28th. 1 year it was March 1st because of leap year or something like that, I think. So let's say on February 28th, you deposit $35,000 per individual buying the home, and you're both first-time home buyers. $35,000, and you make over $200,000. You're getting $17,000, $17,500 back in taxes. That comes in 2 weeks after you do your taxes. So technically 2 months from then, you could have increased your down payment by $17,500. And then you pull that $35,000 back out to then use towards your down payment. So now you have the 35 plus 17.5 going towards your down payment. So that's what I meant by.
You're talking about a completely different thing that I was talking about, but that's good too. I didn't know that. I wasn't even thinking about that.
Okay, what were you talking about?
I'm talking about like the home buyer's plan, where for the person that doesn't have $35,000, I'm talking about like person making way less money that over time has contributed to the RSP.
Oh,
that's invested in it, right? Yes. I don't know if the Liberals increased it to 60,000 or 70,000 now, but it used to be 35,000 you could, or 40,000 you could pull out for your first, not even your first time home, just for any home that you're purchasing or building.
Yes, we're talking about the same
thing. Yeah,
we're talking about the same thing.
Except yours was like a more current, like more recent, right? Like if you're buying it sooner. Versus I'm talking about more longer term, right?
If you're buying it sooner, but also if you haven't contributed. Like some people haven't contributed and they might have that 35,000 just sitting in savings, or like they have that 35,000 as part of their down payment. It's just outside of their RSP. So but it's just timing. Like you take that 35 you have ready for your down payment, you put it in and you pull it back out. And you get an extra 17.5 if you're in the bracket, in the highest bracket, right? So that's what the illustration I was trying to picture out.
Do you have an emergency fund?
Absolutely. That's kind of what I was alluding to earlier. I keep a certain amount of money in cash because if all shit hits the fan and I need to dip into it for some reason, income isn't going well, the market totally turns. On a rainy day, I'll have that money to float myself, and I have at least 1 year's worth of expenses on hand. 12 months of expenses on hand. And that money, if I were to run into a situation like that, I would immediately start cutting expenses. I would immediately start dropping coverages, right? Like other things like that, and bring my monthly expenses down. And it would most likely even go past a year.
When did you implement this emergency fund? Have you always had it, like going back to like when you're 18, or was it more after you bought real estate? When was it?
No, believe it or not, I didn't have an emergency fund up until, so when I was in growth mode, when I was in investment growth mode, like let's try to make this money, as much money, let's try to acquire as many assets as possible. But when the interest rates were about to go up and the news was coming, this needs to happen, then I realized, okay, you know what? I got to liquidate one asset and I got to have some cash on hand. And when I did that, I immediately felt a sense of relief because I felt a sense of being over leveraged, and being over leveraged is terrible. But at the time, I was, again, young. I was in investment growth mode, and I was not thinking about money to the degree that I think about it today, or to being as educated as I am today about it. And so I always recommend at least having 6 months of expenses in your float. And after liquidating a couple of assets, I just made that commitment to have that money on hand.
What is your financial goal and how do you plan on achieving it?
That's a big question. I think my financial goal is to feel like I'm living and I'm working, but I'm not working to live. That's my financial goal, to like feel like when I wake up every day, if today I want to take it off, I can take it off. And if that's similar to financial independence, I think financial independence is
depends on the lifestyle you want to live, though, right?
Absolutely. Like if I wanted to downsize my lifestyle significantly, liquidate a bunch of assets, and then just put them into dividend-paying growth stocks and private lending and travel the world, I feel like that's very doable. But at the same time, like, I think we have purpose in our life. Like, I feel tremendous purpose through, yes, absolutely, I feel like tremendous purpose and fulfillment through my line of work. And I have, especially where I'm at now, having a team, having other people underneath to coach, mentor, all that other stuff, I just feel tremendous fulfillment. But I don't feel the stress, the stress of not being able to meet my financial obligations, or the stress of having to work to just pay my bills and feel like I'm just living paycheck to paycheck, fortunately. And I'm super grateful for that. And I feel like in many ways, maybe I've reached my goal in a sense. But at the end of the day, like, once you reach a goal, you've got to have a bigger goal, right? So for me, that's more so like, how do I impact more people? How do I spread that kind of knowledge across all lines, and really like teach people that skill that I've like fortunately come to acquire, and to be able to feel like that sense of relief that comes from being able to manage your money well and investing your money well. So I think where I'm at right now as a chartered accountant, advising clients with their real estate investments and how to minimize taxes, which is such a huge component of building wealth. And then also investing in one of the investment vehicles I truly believe in, and being a key advisor there. I think between those two things, I feel real fulfillment. And the fact that I'm fortunate enough that both of those roles give me fulfillment and also build or produce an income for me, I don't think I could have it any better.